All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about Floyd Mayweather Jr., Canelo Alvarez. Leonard Ellerby responds in a absolutely hilarious fashion to Canelo Alvarez's loss. Do not ever compare Canelo to Mayweather again. Let's talk about that in this video. Right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. Man, we're going to keep talking about this Canelo Alvarez versus DMITRY BIVOL loss. Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s team comes out and says something that I thought was true before they said it, but now I think many more people should be able to see what they're talking about, and that is that Canelo Alvarez, the people around Canelo Alvarez, the people that are supporters of Canelo Alvarez should have kept Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s name up out their mouths. But before I get into that, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you are a longtime subscriber and supporter to the channel, thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for your support on the channel. If you're new to the channel, please accept my invitation to subscribe, hit the bell icon so that you can be notified of when we release more videos and when we do our live streams, which we do pretty much 7 days a week and really do have great boxing conversations. All right, so here we go. Tweets were released this weekend, yesterday, and Leonard Ellerby, Mayweather Promotions, CEO of Mayweather Promotions, responded to statements that said, in essence, Canelo Alvarez should never be compared to Floyd Mayweather Jr. again. There pretty much is no comparison between these two dudes and their careers. And Leonard Ellerby responds, exactly, never, ever do that again. Now, let's look at that for a second and look at it and understand what was really going on with that. First and foremost, Canelo Alvarez is the cash cow in boxing. Without a doubt, at this point in time, Canelo Alvarez is the cash cow in boxing. We don't know what's going to happen moving forward, because once you start losing, you know, that type of stuff can change pretty quickly. However, he's a big name. You had Matchroom Boxing and DAZN really putting a lot of press out, trying to publicize him, trying to tell them, trying to convince the world that they have the best fighter in the world, the biggest fighter in the world, all of the above. Now, that is going to happen and consistently happens in boxing. You know, entire time I've been watching it, there's always somebody that is the greatest ever that is right there when they're fighting, because the title greatest ever doesn't do anything for any of the people that are earning money off of boxing, when the greatest ever is a guy that fought 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, or what have you. So there's always this constant push to be making history, having a historic fighter, you know, you're watching something you've never seen before, all of those type of things, right? It's always the biggest, the bettest, the biggest, the best, the hardest, the hardest puncher, the fastest puncher. All of those type of things are accolades that are constantly thrown on fighters who are fighting right now. So much so that you had people walking around saying, do you think Canelo Alvarez is the greatest fighter of all time? And them now saying yes. However, if you think about it, even just for a little while, please realize that 2 years ago, before Vasily Lomachenko lost to Teofimo Lopez, there were many of these same people that were talking this stuff that weren't even putting him as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in boxing at the time, let alone having him be the greatest fighter of all time. But specifically, as far as it goes with Floyd Mayweather Jr., that is beyond an insult to Floyd Mayweather Jr. and what Floyd Mayweather Jr. has accomplished in his career, and it is an ongoing insult that the mainstream media and promoters have been throwing at him for the last, in my opinion, for at least the last 11 years. Probably significantly before he fought Manny Pacquiao before he fought Manny Pacquiao and before he fought Canelo Alvarez. In the case of Manny Pacquiao, they were doing it by saying that Manny Pacquiao is the greatest fighter of this century, right? Even though Manny Pacquiao got into a ring with Floyd Mayweather Jr. and lost to Floyd Mayweather Jr. in a lopsided loss, right? Not even though he had lost, he ended up, he basically fought 4 fights with Juan Manuel Marquez and went 2-1-1 with Juan Manuel Marquez. And quite honestly, the draw, he had 3 knockdowns in the first round to get a draw. And that tells you what Juan Manuel Marquez did for 10 out of the 12 rounds of their first fight. You know that he knocked him out in his last fight. And many people, including myself, thought Juan Manuel Marquez won both of the 2 middle fights. So it's hard for me to say that Manny Pacquiao is a better fighter than Juan Manuel Marquez, let alone Floyd Mayweather Jr., who absolutely had an easy time with Juan Manuel Marquez. Relatively easy time with Floyd Mayweather Jr. With Manny Pacquiao. And then he also fought Canelo Alvarez. A Canelo Alvarez who, by the way, at the time of that fight was in his prime. Now, there's a whole lot of people now trying to sell the idea that Canelo Alvarez is in his prime right now. And I have been telling you for at least the last 2 years that Canelo Alvarez is past his prime. When you have 60 fights on you, you're an 18-year professional, you have 60-something fights on you, there is wear and tear on your body, and that wear and tear has been showing on his body for the last several years. He does not have the hand speed, he does not have the foot speed that he used to have, and was resorting to pretty much a gimmick strategy to beat DMITRY BIVOL, a gimmick strategy that worked against lesser fighters out of the like Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith and Rocky Fielding, guys that looked like they were pretty much afraid to be in there with Canelo to begin with, and Canelo just had defensive gaps which would allow him to load up on big shots and get him out of there. Canelo Alvarez fell in love with his power, and that's pretty much what he had over the last several years. When you try to talk about him being with Floyd Mayweather Jr. or comparing him to Floyd Mayweather Jr. in his career, that's just so very, very unfair, because Canelo Alvarez at the least has, well, what does he have? 2 losses, 2 draws, 2 and 3 other fights that people say, nah, I think you lost that. He's just not as skilled a fighter as Floyd Mayweather Jr. Just looking at it from the outside, you're just looking at the 2 guys fight, you know who the more highly skilled fighter is, you know who the more accomplished fighter is, and that is Floyd Mayweather Jr. And it is a disservice for Canelo Alvarez and other people to have acted like, just dismiss the win that Mayweather has on him, and then blow him up to otherworldly status, because it is convenient for his fan base to say that, and convenient for the network that is putting him on. I don't think that there is any way. I was a guy that was big on Canelo, think Canelo is a very, very good fighter. But this idea that the best fighter right now is the best fighter in history, or that a guy that is so good that he does not even need to fight his contemporaries, I think that is just a bad thing. It's a disservice to other fighters. Canelo Alvarez, where people were talking about him fighting Charlo, fighting Andrade, fighting David Benavidez, you have a whole lot of people and networks and pundits talking about, well, we just don't need to see those fights. I have to think that, man, maybe that you guys don't want to see that fight because you know what kind of trouble those fights can be. And I'm telling you, moving forward with Canelo Alvarez, you're not going to see much different. He's not going to just turn this around, because he didn't just lose to DMITRY BIVOL. He got dominated by DMITRY BIVOL, and he got dominated by him not because this guy was a bigger puncher, but because he looked younger, he looked fresher, his hand speed was faster, and on top of it, the book was out on what Canelo Alvarez was doing. So, we'll see what happens from here forward, but do not be surprised, man, if this thing does not turn around for Canelo Alvarez. I don't think it's gonna. And depending on who he fights, do not be surprised if he winds up getting stopped. Because I'm telling you, man, that punching guys on the arms, till they drop their hands. He's gonna have to outbox these guys. He's gonna have to let his hands go. He's gonna have to win rounds like everybody else does, and he's not gonna be able to rely on these one-punch knockouts against these guys. But anyway, it is what it is. That's my take on the matter. Please, no more of this Floyd Mayweather Jr. Canelo Alvarez comparison. You know, maybe, you know, when Canelo Alvarez's career is over, I'm sure he'll go down as a great fighter, go into the Hall of Fame, all of that. But, you know, let's just be fair to other fighters and not exaggerate stuff because we're in the current moment. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Deuce.